Together we heal, learn and shine is not only this year's theme of the World Refugee Day. It also carries so much hope for hundreds of thousands of people who fled their own countries for hardly habitable living conditions in foreign lands. The theme also indicates challenges on the shoulders of people who are working relentlessly for basic human rights. Refugee crisis around the world is becoming increasingly dire due to the outburst of conflicts. According to UNHCR, more than 80 million people were forcibly displaced by conflict, violence and persecution in 2020. Hello, I am Semenyi Shekoye. In today's show, we commemorate the lives that have been lost in war and conflicts, address existing challenges in global refugee communities, and showcase inspiring stories from within and outside refugee camps. As the United Nations recognizes World Refugee Day, families in the Tigray region of Ethiopia continue to be forced to flee to the war, often only to be displaced again by violence or the massive social and economic strain caused by the crisis. WEWE's Heather Murdoch has this report from Shire, Ethiopia.
At this camp in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, families pack up their things swiftly. But it isn't much. Most of their belongings were left behind when they fled the war. Soldiers here say the university campus where these families are being hosted needs to open and people have to leave immediately. Vehicles that locals call bajajes line up to transport people and goods at cheap prices as another camp is set up across town.
They told us we have to leave a month ago. And since then, they have come every few days. The only difference is now they are using force.
UN officials briefly visit, saying the new camp is not ready and the move is unjust. But they quickly concede to local forces and tell people to follow the soldiers' orders. In Tigray, many displaced families were split up in the chaos, with about 2 million people fleeing within Ethiopia and more than 60,000 people crossing the border to take refuge in Sudan.
So many people fled to Sudan, but I was pregnant and couldn't get that far.
After she fled, she says, her husband was arrested and her cattle confiscated. She says she cannot imagine raising 4 children in the camp, but she also does not think it will ever be safe to go home. The war in Tigray began last November when the Tigray People's Liberation Front attacked northern federal bases and the Ethiopian National Defense Force swept through the region. Eritrean forces are fighting with the federal government, and both sides also have associated militias. Civilians in Tigray have reported widespread looting, beatings, mass killings, and rapes. Much of the region is in danger of famine, which is already occurring in some places. And on top of these horrors, the economy has been crushed. Cities are packed with displaced families, while farms go untended and food is not grown.
I was a farmer with good land, and I grew sorghum, but I was displaced just before the harvest and arrived here with nothing.
The global population of forcibly displaced people has more than doubled in the past decade. And in Tigray, locals say numbers keep growing. Heather Murdoch, WEWE News, Shire, Ethiopia.
For more detailed information on refugee situation in Tigray, I talked to Heather Murdoch. Let's take a look.
In the past few months, hundreds of women and girls of all ages have come forward with complaints that they were raped by soldiers and as part of the war. We met some of the women in a health center in Makala. Some of the problems that they're experiencing are extreme physical pain and injuries. Some people are entirely hospitalized. Also dealing with preventing HIV and unwanted pregnancy. So this kind of help is available as well. And also mental health help and help dealing with their families, because there is a lot of stigma surrounding rape here. But one thing that is important to notice that every healthcare professional we talked to about this had to say was that for all of the people that make it to the cities and to the healthcare centers, there's many more that don't. They say the patients will tell them there's many girls in my village that were raped, but only I got to make it to the city for help. And there's many reasons for that. One is that there's not healthcare centers in the countryside very much anymore because most have been looted and many have been damaged, some both. There's also many roads are closed, transportation unavailable, and fear of repercussions. There's a lot of that. Women are afraid to come forward because they were raped, as they say, by authorities.
Have you noticed any prevention mechanism in place to protect women and girls from such crimes?
Before this war, there were efforts to prevent women and girls from crimes like this, but I think the people who are working on this issue are quite overwhelmed by the problem. They haven't seen something like this, where the rates of sexual violence have skyrocketed, and the kind of sexual violence where it's part of a war. It has politics and power attached to it, as opposed to individual cases of crimes. In order to prevent this violence, as I understand it, they say they need to end the war and end the violence in general in the region.
Reports from different humanitarian organizations say that the response to IDPs in Tigray region has been inadequate. Can you describe the living condition you saw them in?
Well, every place we went was very crowded, so a single classroom could hold between 30 to, even at one place we saw they said 100 people slept in the individual classrooms. Another issue that we saw consistently was lack of sanitation and lack of advanced medicine. Food was varied from camp to camp. Some camps said, well, we have enough food that is donated by this charity or this organization. Others said that they just didn't have enough food, that they got a little bit of food every day, but some days they were skipped and they didn't get any food.
Were you able to talk to some IDPs and hear their personal story? Did they tell you, for example, how they managed to get there and what their journey was like?
One consistent story that happened over and over again is families were in their homes, in their villages or towns, and it was attacked or invaded. For whatever reason, there are soldiers coming into town or artillery coming into the town, so people ran off. Often they were displaced then several times, where people would first go to the nearest available place, maybe family or friends in a nearby town, and what was fairly common is that the violence came to that town, and they kept moving until they arrived in the city. In the city of Axum, as I mentioned, there were people in the churchyard, which isn't a sanctioned or organized IDP camp, but we met one woman there who said there's just literally no other place she could find that she would be accepted. A lot of people we spoke to said they do feel relatively safe in the camps and in the cities. That for the most part, people thought it was at the very least much safer there than it was where they came from. But we also spoke to many people who said they would not plan to go home ever. That the people who had been living in their town or village for their lifetimes said they couldn't even imagine going back, even if it was safe. A few people we spoke to also did say, if it's safe, we'll go back because this life as a displaced person is not sustainable. There's nothing to do as a displaced family.
IDPs are not only in Tigray region. Actually, according to the UN, Ethiopia has one of the largest internally displaced population, and displacement risk remains high. Do you think this is stretching the humanitarian assistance effort thin? And if you talk to any of the humanitarian organizations there, what do they say are their main challenges to assist IDPs?
They say they now have, just recently, access to 1.4 million people who need immediate food assistance, but they say that's not even half of who they need to reach urgently. The other thing that they say is that in terms of health care, not only access for the organizations to get to the places where people need emergency health care, for the people to get to the organizations, both are very difficult.
What is the government doing to assist the IDPs or even the sexual violence victims and rape victims?
They sent 170 metric tons of food aid to Tigray. They have said several times that they, as you mentioned before, that they intend to prosecute the people who are accused of raping women and girls as part of the war. What we do know is that the government says that it recognizes that there is a crisis going on, and it says that they are committed to trying to help avert it.
Thank you, Heather. Now we move to Cameroon. In northern Cameroon's refugee camps, conflicts over natural resources between host communities and mostly Nigerian refugees have caused tensions and environmental damage. One aid group is working to reduce these tensions and improve the ecology by reforesting in and around the camps.
Nigerian refugee Mariamo Andrawos cooks with charcoal she makes herself at Minawawo camp, her home for the past 5 years in northern Cameroon.
To find wood, we had to go into the bush. And even in the bush, it was not easy. We couldn't cut wood. People chased us. They confiscated our equipment, our tools.
The Minawawo area hosts about 118,000 Nigerians who, since 2014, have been fleeing unrest caused by Nigerian militant Islamist group Boko Haram. The number of refugees in the area has further strained natural resources like wood for cooking, creating tensions between the host community.
Before the arrival of the refugees, these people paid 100 francs for a bundle of wood. Now they can't even find the wood. Even with 1,000 francs, you can't get it.
To reduce the tensions and restore the ecology, the UN's refugee agency and local aid groups are reforesting around the camp.
According to my observation, the reforestation is more accentuated in the refugee camp. Outside the camp, there is reforestation, but it is not enough. It is necessary to reforest the whole area. Wherever the host population suffers, everything must be reforested.
The UNHCR says in the past 5 years, they have so far planted more than 500,000 seedlings. They are also teaching refugees and locals renewable cooking fuel options, such as making charcoal for household waste.
Des cuisinières solaires. Donc c'est un système aussi que nous allons.
Solar stoves? It is a system that we are going to experiment with in the camp. If we see that it can work very well, why not popularize them so that refugees can start cooking with solar energy?
La cuisine avec l'énergie solaire.
Meanwhile, Nigerian refugees like Andrawos can make and sell the household waste coal to earn money while helping to save trees. Andrawos has used her profits to start a small goat breeding farm. For Anne Zwanke in Minawawo, Cameroon, Moki, Edwin Kinzaka for VOA News.
We need to take a quick break, but coming up, we'll bring you more stories on the fight against the refugee crisis. Stay tuned.
We're bringing women's voices to the conversation, and more than that, we're building a community of inclusion and empowerment.
Here in Kinshasa, campaigns to raise awareness against the spread of coronavirus are common, but getting that information to people who have no access to water, electricity, or money can be a challenge.
We are here at Kalerwe Market, Uganda, Kampala, where in this whole market, women are crying out for their situations to change.
For women, it will be better for us.
I think a big thing for me is just being able to say that when these protests are happening, does it turn around into policy?
Our kids are raped every single day.
This movement got the government to listen. It really was powerful because it showed what is possible when men and women band together and say enough is enough.
It's not necessary anymore to climb on a car. I can be in any place to cheer with the people.
Welcome back. You are watching Our Voices. During the Turkish incursion into Syria in October 2019, hundreds of thousands of Syrians were internally displaced to various refugee camps. WEWE's Neuros Risho brings us the story of a displaced health worker who now lives and serves in a Syrian refugee camp. Bezan Hamdat narrates.
Dilovan Sido used to be a health worker at the Afrin hospital in Syria, but like thousands of others, he was displaced after the Turkish incursion in the fall of 2019. He found refuge in the Shahbar refugee camp, where he and his colleagues quickly set up a makeshift clinic.
In the beginning, we set up 2 tents and we treated hundreds or even thousands of people under the tents with our doctors and friends who had fled Afrin. We used the medicines we had taken from Afrin, and some aid from other areas also reached Shahbar region. Meanwhile, we started looking for a place where we could build a small hospital.
Sido fled in his work scrubs with nothing but his tambourine.
My tambourine was always my friend during the war and during the migration till we reached the Shahbar region. Even here the morale of our friends had fallen. There were mental breakdowns among friends and the people. Through the tambourine and the songs, we could bring positive vibes and sprinkle hopes in their heads.
2020 brought a new level of fear among the refugees in Shahbar camp as the coronavirus pandemic spread in the region. While Sido and his colleagues have assisted thousands of patients in their makeshift tents, he says the best treatment for refugees is returning to their homes.
I would like to say to all the humanitarian organisations and the United Nations that the most important remedy for our IDPs in Shahbar camp is their return to their land and their olive trees.
Aside from playing his tambourine, Sido also enjoys gardening to ease the pain of living in a refugee camp. For Neuros Rishu in Shahbar refugee camp, Syria, Bejan Hamdard, WEWE News.
Let's move to Uganda. Africa's largest refugee host is locking down the movement after another spike in COVID-19 cases, heightening economic struggles for the urban vulnerables. One refugee from the Democratic Republic of Congo started a youth-led initiative to help her fellow refugees get needed healthcare products and market their own goods. Halima Atumani reports from Kampala.
Noela Kabale arrived in Uganda in 2011 from the Democratic Republic of Congo, fleeing civil strife. She settled in Kampala, but little did she know life was going to be even more difficult. While living hand to mouth, Noela got vocational hands-on training for arts and crafts and eventually formed the Refugee Entrepreneurship Association with her small savings. Noela says the group is working to overcome perceptions that refugees are beggars by producing products to help deal with the COVID-19 pandemic.
I know putting on mask is not a guarantee, but at least it's going to enable this one person to curb the spread of COVID. So our community cannot really afford to get every person could not afford to buy a pad. So we sat down, we had the material with us. Why can't you support our own community?
The Refugee Entrepreneurship Association group consists mainly of divorcees, single mothers and youths, many of whom are victims of gender-based violence. Most of the products made by these women are sold online and during functions, and that money is used to run the association. Leonie Mudumbi says life has changed since she joined the group in 2018.
Thinking about Congo and living here, mixing those thoughts would kill us. She started by counseling us, and we then started teaching ourselves how to make all the things you see here. It really helps us.
Uganda is home to about 1.5 million refugees, 92,000 of these living in urban areas. Julius Mchunguzi, communications chief in the Prime Minister's office, says over the years, refugees have become vital members of the community.
Refugees are not just in countries as a burden. Yes, they are burdened, but they have a contribution they make. And that is precisely one of the things that, one of the issues that defines the refugee policy of Uganda.
The UN High Commission for Refugees has recorded 628 coronavirus cases among refugees, with almost 200 of these cases in Kampala. 11 refugee deaths have been recorded since March 2020. While the UNHCR has stepped up support for refugees in settlements during this current second wave of the pandemic, help for urban refugees is limited, says agency official Wendy Kasuja.
Now with the second wave, we are only focusing on the most vulnerable. Not everybody, it's not blanket support anymore, so we are only looking at the most vulnerable. However, in terms of health, in terms of livelihoods, that's for whoever needs it.
Uganda is currently on a partial lockdown that ends July 19th, and the restricted inter-district travel affects many refugees and locals. But by using what little savings they have and by selling their products, Kabali and her team continue to lend a hand to fellow refugees and locals. Halima Athmani for WEWE News, Kampala, Uganda.
2 Malian refugees met in a Burkina Faso refugee camp after spending much of their youth fleeing Islamist violence and struggling with trauma, until they found dance. The young men joined a program that trains marginalized youth as a tool for reconciliation and healing. Claire McDougall has the report from Ouagadougou.
Malian dance students Amri Ag Abdoulaye and Mohamed Oud Najim are struggling to master a new routine. For much of their lives, they've been struggling to survive, living in an insecure refugee camp on the Mali-Burkina Faso border after fleeing Islamist militants.
Dance has helped us forget how many of the things we have been through. When we came here, there was sadness, a lot of sadness.
The 3-year program by France-based Burkinabe dancer Salia Sanu aims to help marginalized youth and refugees.
The center has a mission to reach out to youth and refugees in difficult situations to do cultural and artistic meditation. Through dance, these people can find themselves.
Najim says dance is helping them to express themselves and tell their stories.
When we were at camp in Mentau, we were closed in. I wasn't happy to be alive. I was just living. That was it for me. My life changed with the dance, and I am more at ease than before, and I've overcome a lot of sins.
Dance instructor Idrissa Kafando is training the group of 25 students, some of whom are from marginalized backgrounds.
We educate everyone who comes here. Dance can allow you to re-innovate yourself and become another person.
The 2 young men hope the training will help them become known as dancers, not just part of the 23,000 Malian refugees living in Burkina Faso. Claire McDougall for WEWE News, Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso.
Dancing as a healing power. What an inspiring story. Please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and our handle is @WEWE Our Voices. We are on WhatsApp too, and our number is on the screen. We will take a short break now, and coming up, we'll introduce you to a special series produced by WEWE, A Day in the Life of Refugees. A desperately ill child sets out to a medical treatment. A Coast Guard officer keeps watch overnight. An Iraqi becomes an American. Meet them all in a single day in a life of refugees. Voice of America's 96 minutes long documentary sets out to hear as many of these perspectives as possible. Let's take a sneak peek of this 8-part series.
It's 0 hours of the 20th of June.
It's 2019. Maritime police from Frontex, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, will search for refugees trying to cross from Turkey into Greece. This year, more than 50 people have died trying to cross. 2 this month. At the same time, it is early morning in Indonesia. Attendees at morning prayers will include Afghans who fled here. They thought they would be safe once in the world's largest Muslim country. The reality is different. In the United States, volunteers will wait near a border overwhelmed by migrants who are willing to risk it all.
Everything you have ever had, everyone you have ever known, and flee to a country that you know is in all likelihood going to be hostile to you. But that's your only choice.
Around the world, dignitaries and refugees will mark World Refugee Day. A single day representing a worldwide crisis that on this day seems to be only getting worse. These are just a few of the more than 70 million stories that can be told this day. On this single day, Voice of America sends more than 75 photojournalists to tell those stories. June 20th, 2019. It is World Refugee Day, the last World Refugee Day before the COVID pandemic.
It's important that people are aware it's everyone's problem.
A day like any other day in the life of refugees.
For the complete version of this documentary, please check VOA's website at www.voanews.com. That's all for our show this week. We salute the humanitarian workers who are fighting for the safe return of those being displaced and people who stay positive in the face of adversities. Until next time, stay strong and be safe.
Babu, nihadithia hadithi nzuri.
Hapo zamani za kale palikuwa na jabali mmoja tu. Jabali huyo aliweza kusafiri umbali mrefu hadi Uchina. Na jabali huyo watu walimsifu sana kwa kuwa alikuwa ni mwaminifu. Na hata ukimtuma kitu, anakuletea kwa wakati, tena bila gharama kubwa. Je, unamjua aliitwa nani?
Pana babu.
Aliitwa GNM Cargo.
Ndiyo, GNM Cargo, mahodari wa usafirishaji wa mizigo kutoka China kwa njia ya forodha. Tuma pesa kwa wakala China, alafu GNM Cargo tuukague mzigo wako, tuupakie na kusafirisha. Tupigie leo 0677 066 551. GNM Cargo, we voyage your dreams.